Mr. Sunak has to be keeping his party together.
Yeah.
That has to come absolutely first. And it is pretty fractious, it has to be said, and may well get more fractious after the local elections.
Shall we go on to some of the issues of the day then? MPs have voted in favour of the government's Renters Reform Bill, despite it including an indefinite delay to the end of no-fault evictions. Kate, this Section 21, this is what it's all been about. This has been the centrepiece of this bill, and the kind of concern, I suppose, from renters' kind of organisations was that Section 21 kicked into the long grass by these amendments. The sort of line from the government pre-vote was that they're looking to have the court system ready for making the change. And I just wonder how does all of this go anywhere close to pacifying renters?
Yeah, I think if we just step back with this bill for a bit, this is meant to be a pretty flagship bill by the government about making renting kind of fairer and more secure. And so they promised this big bill. Michael Gove, the man who's allowed to do reform in government, promised it. And the point was that it would make it tougher for your landlord to just turf you out, these things called no-fault evictions. But it does look like, doesn't it, that that's really been kicked into the long grass tonight. So there's been this big, huge row in the kind of Conservative Party. Do you have these beefed up protections for renters, or you kind of have the landlord class re-emerging saying, no, we need more flexibility. This will put off people renting their homes out. I mean, I think surely it'll be a big disappointment to Generation Rent today that they've not got that extra protection. And I think probably this speaks to a broader political point, which is there really isn't the appetite in the Conservative Party at the moment to have rows with their backbenchers and to have these rebellions. And so with a lot of these reforms, you're just seeing them kind of inch away from that conflict and really water them down. And that's probably what we've seen tonight.
Yeah, I think this is really awkward for the government because they were talking about housing, which is one of people's main concerns. There were bold promises made by Michael Gove that he could put things right, not just on no-fault evictions, but also on the whole question of leaseholds and things, which is the problem for people coming into the housing market now on new builds, that they're the ones often who are being gouged. And it may be that the government, the Conservative Party is right to see that there's another side to this argument, that because a lot of people are getting out of the own-to-buy market, own-to-rent market, because it's got tricky, so maybe they don't want to make it more difficult for them. Unfortunate that, statistics have gone in, and I think something like 60 Conservative MPs are landlords themselves. So, having raised this issue, it's not a good look to be seen to be backing away.
Yeah.
This actually reminded me of something when I was on the other day. We were talking about a poll, and that day the poll revealed that the Labour Party is ahead with every age group apart from 70 plus. And so what this big row speaks to is kind of what is the Tory offer for young people. Look, in parts of the country, this big renters debate isn't that important because you can still afford to buy a home, like in the northeast or whatever. But in London, in big cities, in big towns, you've got a whole generation of people who aren't being able to get on the housing ladder and are stuck renting well into their 40s, perhaps into their 50s, well into their adult life. And I think kind of some reform that would give them stability is being cried out for. I mean, I can speak to the London example. I'm sure it's true also in Manchester and other big cities.
But it is back to, where the Sunak government is, which is trying to consolidate the core, stop its voters, who are predominantly elderly voters, going off to maybe reform, rather than actually trying to widen the tent to younger people.
Yeah. Does this speak to a point that I've just had in my head for the last few weeks around at what point have we already passed this tipping point where you're more focused on campaigning for the general election than you are on sort of legislating ahead of it? You want to kind of campaign on issues rather than legislate on them or for them. Are we at that point? Is that where we're at?
I think the priority is for Mr. Sunak has to be keeping his party together.
Yeah.
That has to come absolutely first. And it is pretty fractious. It has to be said, and may well get more fractious after the local elections.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I mean, the political context, right, is you're going to have these local elections. What are they, next Thursday? We get the results trickling in a few days afterwards. And Rishi's kind of trying to hold this warring party together. And he doesn't know if he's going to keep these mayoral seats next week. How many hundreds of councillors might he lose? And I think he just cannot afford to spend the political capital on a dust-up with his backbenchers on renters reform, where the reality is the polls show renters, young people, they're not voting Tory anyway.
Matt texts, Adam, would you include Tony Benn as a backbencher who cut through? Appreciate he was a minister in the 60s, asks Matt.
Well, certainly I think he was someone who had a personal following. I mean, oddly, I was thinking, as we were talking, that another name that one would have thought of was Jeremy Corbyn.
I actually thought that, and I was like, you can't say that because he was a leader.
Because then he went on and he became a leader, and to a certain extent it all fell apart. But he obviously had that following of Jeremy Corbyn, and likewise, I think Tony Benn did, although, you know, as Matt points out, you know, he was quite a significant minister in the Wilson government, was then a very significant player in the early 80s, trying to become the deputy leader of the party. So I wouldn't say that, as it were, Tony Benn or indeed Jeremy Corbyn in the end were figures who kind of stood alone away from party politics in that way.
So on reflection on Frank Field, we're considering backbenchers who stand alone, who can cut through and who can make an impact. If you've got suggestions, you can WhatsApp us. 0333 003 2353 is the number to get in touch. Right, in a few minutes then, what's the point of Ofcom? Stand by for that. It's 17 minutes past 7.